Now that we get the basics of blending, let's see it being put to action in 3 different ways. Just keep in mind that these are only 3 ways, and there are ways that I like to do it, but that doesn't mean you have to do the same thing. Like I said before, experiment to find your favorite way, and there are an infinite number of ways of doing this. So the first one is using the wet and wet technique. I'm not using a soaking wet brush, but it is wet and I am being generous with the amount of paint I put down, and water. I have to work quick because the paint will only spread and blend while it's wet, but the more water I use, the longer it takes to dry anyway, so you have time since it's pretty wet. The fun thing about this technique is it's loose and the textures that are created where the paints blend are beautiful. There's a lot of texture but also fun and seamless blending, but you have less control because the paint will travel more because there's water on the page. This is the fun and loose way to paint. You can add in color at any time and just watch it move around. If you put too much paint somewhere, you can always clean and dry your brush and then use it to pick up excess paint or water, or you could use a paper towel. And you can also add more paint of different colors at any time. We are using the wet and wet technique here. Notice how I accidentally touched the spear with a shadow and this made the paint bleed into it. These kinds of accidents can be beautiful but can be avoided if you paint more carefully and can always be painted over. But I think it gives it more character and adds to the loose look. In the second way of painting, I use less water and thicker paint and set down where I want the shadow first and then paint in the rest of the spear. Then I go back in to smooth out and blend what I already painted with a wet brush. Since gouache is rebuttable, it doesn't matter if it dries like it did here. I can add more paint or more water at any time. I add in lighter colors because I thought I made it too dark, but that's the great thing about gouache, it can be easily layered like this. Since I use less water, the spear is less loose in texture than the last one and is more realistic. For this last one, I painted out the base colors first and then let it fully dry, and now I can go back in and add the shadows and highlights, being careful not to thin out my paint too much by not using too much water. I use my normal layering technique with this. And then I blend it just like I did with the others, but since I'm using even less water, there is hardly any textures and the blending is very smooth. This is a way a lot of artists like to paint because it can be very easy to do and it's more realistic. I can always go back in and add different details or layers or paint over mistakes after my painting is dry. I didn't do that here, but remembering that keeps the pressure off about making it perfect right away. I hope this demonstration showed you how you can blend in many different ways and took some of the mystery out of it. It's really a personal preference, so just try as many different techniques as you can, even put your own twist on it to make it your own unique way of working with this amazing medium. Now let's get into some advanced tips and tricks.